I want to start with something many people feel, but rarely say out loud. You're around people. Sometimes a lot of people. Friends, family, coworkers, classmates. And yet, something still feels off, like you're present physically, but not fully connected emotionally. You listen, you talk, you smile, you participate. But deep down, part of you still feels separate somehow, like everyone else naturally fits somewhere, and you don't. And sometimes, you can't even explain why. Nothing terrible happened. Nobody openly rejected you. But the feeling remains, that strange emotional distance, like you're always slightly outside the connection, watching it, instead of fully living inside it. So the question becomes, why do some people feel like they don't belong anywhere? Let's break it down. The first reason is emotional difference. Some people experience the world more deeply than the people around them. They notice more, feel more, analyze more, and because of that, they often feel emotionally out of sync with others. Conversations that feel natural for most people can feel strangely empty to them, not because they dislike people, but because their nervous system craves deeper emotional resonance. The second reason is masking. A lot of people learn very early that certain parts of themselves feel unsafe to show. Their emotions, their personality, their sensitivity, their thoughts. So they adapt. They become more acceptable, more careful, more filtered. And eventually, they become so used to performing socially that they stop feeling emotionally seen, because people can only deeply connect with the parts of you they're actually allowed to see. The third reason is past rejection. Even subtle rejection can deeply affect the nervous system. Feeling excluded, misunderstood, ignored, emotionally dismissed, especially during childhood or emotionally vulnerable periods, because once your brain learns connection might not be safe, part of you stays emotionally cautious afterward, even in healthy environments. The fourth reason is loneliness that became identity. Sometimes people spend so long feeling emotionally disconnected that the feeling itself becomes familiar. And eventually, being emotionally separate starts feeling normal, not comfortable, just expected, which means even when connection becomes possible, part of the nervous system still struggles to trust it. The fifth reason is overthinking. Some people don't just experience social interactions naturally, they monitor themselves constantly. How do I sound? Am I being weird? Do I fit here? And when your attention becomes trapped inside self-monitoring, it becomes very difficult to feel emotionally present, because instead of experiencing connection, you're analyzing yourself inside it. The sixth reason is emotional mismatch. Sometimes you genuinely are surrounded by people who don't emotionally understand you deeply, not because they're bad people, but because compatibility is emotional too. Some environments naturally feel emotionally safe, others don't. And when you spend long periods in emotionally incompatible spaces, your nervous system begins associating connection with exhaustion. The seventh reason is sensitivity. Highly sensitive people often feel emotionally isolated, even when they're not physically alone, because they experience emotional nuance very intensely. Small changes in energy, tone, behavior, distance, things other people barely notice, can feel emotionally significant to them. And over time, that emotional intensity can create a feeling of separation from others. The eighth reason is identity confusion. Some people spent so much of life adapting to others that they never fully developed a stable sense of self. So now, no environment feels fully right, because internally, they still don't fully know where they belong emotionally. The ninth reason is emotional exhaustion. Belonging requires vulnerability, and vulnerability becomes difficult when your nervous system has spent years protecting itself emotionally. Because connection requires openness, and exhausted people often survive through emotional withdrawal instead. Now here's where it gets important. Feeling like you don't belong doesn't automatically mean you're broken, and it doesn't always mean you'll feel this way forever. Sometimes it simply means your nervous system hasn't experienced enough spaces where you felt emotionally safe being fully yourself, because real belonging is not about being surrounded by people constantly. It's about feeling emotionally accepted, without needing to hide who you are, and many people go years without ever fully experiencing that. But here's the truth most people never realize. Belonging is not something you force. It's something your nervous system slowly learns through safety, through consistency, through emotional honesty, through spaces where you stop feeling the need to perform constantly. And once that starts happening, something changes. You stop trying so hard to become acceptable to everyone, and start becoming more honest about who you actually are, which feels terrifying at first, because authenticity risks rejection. But it also creates the possibility of real connection for the first time, because the version of you that constantly performs may receive attention, but rarely feels truly known. And eventually, that becomes emotionally exhausting. So healing the feeling of not belonging usually doesn't begin with finding perfect people. It begins with slowly becoming emotionally visible again, letting people see your real thoughts, your real emotions, your real personality, even imperfectly. And over time, your nervous system starts learning something new. That connection doesn't always require hiding. That acceptance doesn't always require performance. And that belonging is less about fitting perfectly into every space, and more about finding spaces where you no longer feel pressured to abandon yourself emotionally. And maybe that's the real shift, not suddenly feeling connected to everyone, but finally finding people around whom your nervous system can relax, people who make you feel less edited, less monitored, less alone. Because real belonging doesn't feel like proving yourself constantly. It feels like finally being able to breathe emotionally, and once you experience that, even briefly, you realize something important. You were never incapable of connection. Your nervous system was simply waiting for a place where it finally felt safe enough to stay. You know what's strange? Sometimes the feeling of not belonging doesn't come from other people rejecting you. It comes from hiding parts of yourself for so long that nobody ever fully meets the real you, so you become quieter, more careful, more emotionally guarded. Not because you want distance, but because distance feels safer than disappointment. And over time, you get so used to filtering yourself that even when people accept you, part of you still feels unseen, because the real you never fully arrived emotionally, and maybe that's why belonging feels so difficult. Because real connection doesn't happen through performance, it happens through emotional honesty, through slowly allowing yourself to exist without constantly monitoring every word, every reaction, every part of yourself. And once you finally experience people around whom your nervous system can relax, something changes. You stop trying to belong everywhere and start realizing you only needed spaces where you no longer had to hide to feel accepted.